Welcome to the Darnell and Cody show, where we talk about social, political, and philosophical issues currently relevant to us as a society. Today, we're going to be starting something a little bit different. We're going to be doing a mini-series that dives into the differences between Andrew Yang and other candidates. Today, we're going to be going into a conversation about Bernie Sanders, and we're going to compare him to Andrew Yang. Darnell, you want to start us off?
Sure. There are many similarities as well as differences between Yang and Bernie. Of course, we can't fully compare the two on everything, but we'll try our best with the key information that we have, particularly on their websites and their appearances online. Now, Bernie Sanders has stated before that UBI could be a good thing, but doesn't really expound on it beyond that. His focus is more on raising the minimum wage and giving free education in the form of universities, community colleges, and vocational schools, something that will cost trillions of dollars and be comparable to the price of universal basic income. So, in my view, and my math isn't perfect here, but I would guess that having both UBI and free colleges are not viable. So the question is, which is better? And I think UBI very clearly wins out, since you can use the proceeds of UBI to fund your education if you so choose it. And for those that don't want to go to college, they can keep their money and do something else productive. Yang very clearly outlines this key point that college isn't the end-all be-all. There are many people that kind of pompously think that college is imperative to being an intelligent, aware human being, but there are numerous ways in which a person can learn and become informed. College is just one of them. And I've myself experienced countless buffoonery, drunkenness, and ill-spent time in college. So I think that speaks for itself in some aspects of how college isn't for everyone. So while it's true that college can be immensely beneficial, not just in finding a job, but in learning in general life experiences, it's not something that has an equal value to all. And that's just a fact. What UBI will do is still give someone the option to go to college with their dividend. It might not cover the full ride towards a degree, but it will be a considerable assistance. Another thing to mention is that we don't often ask ourselves why universities are so expensive. Some people think it's because federal and state governments have cut funding, so the price has been transferred onto the students, but they're ignoring the fact why college is so expensive to begin with. I would highly recommend watching a video on YouTube by Business Casual called The Degree Factory, Why Universities Are So Expensive. It's not because the government is cutting funding. It has more to do with bloating administrative costs and the universities functioning as a business focused on their reputation and revenue than the welfare of students and their education. Andrew Yang addresses this. His solution isn't for the government to fund the business of education. He wants to curb how the universities function and change their business model to benefit the students instead of administrators, which will thus make college more affordable. This is a classic case of addressing a symptom versus addressing a cause. And I think this is the key difference between Sanders and Yang. Yang has an iron focus on the causes of the country's problems, whereas Sanders is interested in bandaging the wounds rather than dismantling the arrow that causes the wounds.
Well, I totally agree, especially with the issue with the bloating of the universities. It's really interesting to hear the candidates talk about this because they both know it's an issue. But then you have Bernie Sanders, when he's talking about it, he's complaining about college coaches getting paid millions of dollars, which obviously is an issue in of itself. But he's not getting to the core issue. He doesn't seem to really understand it the way that Yang does, where, there's a lot of other things at play besides a football coach. There's tons of administrative hires that happen and just all kinds of facilities that get built and just ridiculous things like, like food courts with 6 different restaurants on one campus just to draw people, make it a more attractive place when really it's not to, get whatever fast food you want. It's to learn what you're supposed to learn. So it just seems like Yang has a better understanding of the core issue there. And, both of them also want to go and tackle the tuition costs, as I've said, but Yang seems like he has a better grasp on how to do that. And Bernie just seems to want to, give college to everybody, as if giving college to, 80 or 90% of the United States population who is at that age requirement to be able to get the free college. He seems to think that's going to somehow like fix the economy, which it's Obviously not, because we have students now who are graduating from college who can't find work, and they're living with tens of thousands of dollars in student loans at this point because of how ridiculous the college prices are. So Yang wants to, place a lot more importance on vocational work, which is where people can find an honest living and not have to pay an exorbitant amount of money to do it, which is, again, jobs that need to be filled. We're going to need a population that is going to be able to fill these jobs and to live on these jobs, more importantly. And Yang, once again, sees more clarity on the issue where you have to have people all over. You have to have a diverse workforce, and you have to value everyone in that workforce. You can't just tell everyone to go to college and then deal with life after that. It's not working the way that Bernie wants it to already.
Right. And that's one of the key points, right? Bandaging the issue with giving everyone free college is not going to change the problems we have with education right now. College tuitions are too expensive. That doesn't mean the government should pay for it. Address why it's expensive, right? And we have to also look at it, like you said, all these kids don't have jobs with or without a degree. What do we do about that? The college, just everyone going to college isn't the answer. And a lot of people do say, and this is a fair point, that college isn't just about getting a job. It's also about the experiences you can have there, becoming well informed and learning things. But college, like I said, college isn't the end all be all. You can learn and become informed through numerous other ways. A lot of things you can just learn off of books even. And while there is this college experience that's always going to be idealized and admittedly has a realistic value, it's not going to be for everyone. And something that we all have to admit to ourselves and start lying that everyone is going to enjoy college or everyone needs to go to college. The next thing I wanted to talk about was...
Oh, before you move on, I just
Right.
want to mention also, just to say, like, you get a great experience at college. It's obviously a great time. It's fun and etc. But you also have to be willing to, do those activities. If you stay inside your dorm, which some people do during college, they don't experience, some of the fun. They miss out on it. And that's the same regardless of whether you're in college or not. If you're not in a normal college, you can still gather with classmates and have this same or similar type of fun. It's not going to be living in the same circumstances, but you still just have to be willing to put yourself out there in order to have fun, regardless of being on campus or not. So,
Right. And like I said, the goal of university isn't just to have fun, right? I mean, that's another thing that, now that you mention it, is worrisome to me, that these kids will go to college and say, well, it's free. Let's go and, go party and get drunk all the time, whatever. I've seen that happen during my years. A lot of my friends didn't make it past the first year because they were just getting drunk all the time and, doing drugs. And that's not the goal of college. And I'm fearful when you make college free, people are going to take advantage of it for the wrong reasons rather than, to actually pursue an education and degree. The next thing I want to talk about was the Green New Deal. And both Yang and Sanders are for the Green New Deal, but Yang has stated this on Twitter that he's for it, but prior to that, he states that the priority for Americans are UBI. And this is something that's like the key takeaway here, because I don't think that the Green New Deal and the UBI can coexist in terms of how much it's going to cost to fund the programs. So obviously, the Green New Deal is not badly intentioned. I think everyone can agree that cutting climate pollution and giving jobs to everyone these are good things, and reducing carbon emissions and investing in new renewable energy is supremely important. And giving all Americans a job is, the added bonus here. I don't think anybody is against that, but the problem again goes back to the costs. There are over, for instance, 250 million cars in the U.S., nearly all of them operating on fossil fuels. Over 90% of our energy currently comes from fossil fuels. The undertaking of dismantling all this infrastructure would cost trillions while also destroying millions of jobs. So Senator Cortez, I believe, who is supporting this deal, wants to also make it so that the country is carbon neutral in 10 years. And that's simply not feasible. I don't think anybody can say with a straight face that this is going to happen. So I'm glad that Yang is prioritizing the UBI over the Green New Deal, because I also think that you can't fund both, and you got to go with what makes sense here, which is UBI. In the case of Sanders, I'm inclined to think that he will actually try to push for free college and push for the Green New Deal at the same time. And I honestly don't think that these will be feasible without bankrupting the nation. And it's caused rifts within even the left. Unions are split over GND because a lot of their jobs are on the line here in the Green New Deal. So it brings further questions into feasibility. It's not even fully supported by the left. And then you're going to try to push this onto the American people and, suddenly tell them you can't drive these cars. We're going to give you all electric cars magically, right? I don't know how it's going to happen in 10 years. And frankly, I don't think investing, or I should say, frankly, the better option, I think, is to invest in carbon sucking machines like they have in Switzerland right now. And there's some in development by MIT. And these machines will essentially suck the carbon out of the air and even renew those carbons to grow vegetables and stuff like that. And that's a much more feasible approach than simply saying get rid of all these, coal plants and get rid of all the cars and get rid of all these other fossil fuels. It's simply not going to happen anytime soon, and you got to be realistic about that. What are your thoughts on this, Cody?
Well, I totally agree. I mean, it's interesting that the Green New Deal is trying to get rid of carbon emissions, but it doesn't mention nuclear energy as a option really for like a solution. And Andrew Yang talks about nuclear. He's totally for nuclear. He thinks that that's pretty much going to be one of the keys to us succeeding as a nation in terms of becoming energy independent. And so the Green New Deal kind of just misses this. And the reason why, at least I have heard, that Yang supports the Green New Deal, he explains this himself. And he basically, I'm paraphrasing, but he says that it's better to have no solution. Or, I mean, it's better to have a solution than no solution. And the Green New Deal isn't perfect. It has many, many flaws, but it still addresses an issue where there is no other solution. And I don't want to get too much into the difference of politics on this particular podcast, but there is one side of the political equation that is trying to deal with climate change, and there's another side that is still trying to deny that it even exists for the most part. So, you kind of have to take what you can get in regards to what is becoming popular or put forth in actual politics, like making bills. The Green New Deal is one of the few bills that addresses this issue, which is why Yang has supported it. But as he said, it's nowhere near perfect. And it's interesting that, it guarantees the right to all workers. It doesn't just talk about what is at the issue at its core, which is climate. It says that every single American should be guaranteed the right to work, and they should be guaranteed a job that is going to provide them a living wage. And this just absolutely does not make sense. And the reason for this is because you're going to have bad employees at the end of the day. Everyone has worked with someone who's been a bad employee if they've had a job. And sometimes these people last a while, but they typically end up getting fired. And I mean terrible employees, like people that call off sick all the time and, they're obviously just don't want to go into work and things like that. So if you have a bad apple and you try and fire them and then they just get guaranteed to a different job, or maybe, I don't know how this program is set up, but are you going to be able to fire someone who's guaranteed a job? What happens if you do fire them? They're going to get guaranteed another job. That's how it works, apparently, according to my own understanding. So you're going to have people that are just bad apples in the workforce, and they're going to be guaranteed a job whether they want to show up for it or not. That's going to be disruptive to the workplace in and of itself. It's just not feasible. It's also just not feasible for the economy because certain people need to be phased out of the workforce. And that's just the way it is. If someone doesn't have the proper skill set for the current economy and the current job sets that are required, such as, various miners that are starting to realize this now, their job sets don't meet the requirements for a lot of, skilled work. And they can find work other places, and that should be feasible to live on if you're an employee at Walmart or whatever. You should be able to live on that. but they're not going to be able to make the amount of money that they did prior as they were a skilled laborer, basically.
Right, and that's
So,
why UBI is so important. So you can give these people options rather than just phase them out and say tough luck.
exactly, exactly. You don't just fire somebody from this thing and be like, all right, well, now you have to go work at Walmart and we're not going to give you any help at all. Um, the UBI will at least allow them to pay their rent, hopefully for some food as well. And then they can, consider options. They might even be able to go to school with more peace of mind, learn a new skill, which is what the UBI is for, really. If you have peace of mind and you have a guaranteed living subsistence, at least you can pay your rent, you can get a roof over your head, you can eat and drink when you need to. You're not worried about where your next meal is going to come from. Odds are that you're going to be able to come up with a solution for yourself if you're in that circumstance. But if you're scrounging for meager wages, you have to stand in a corner asking for dollars because there's no other option for the time being, then you're not going to be able to learn something new and you're not going to be able to grow in the economy.
Right, or you're going to be just relying on the government for welfare programs that says as long as you're poor, we'll keep paying you, but if you want to get a job, then we'll stop paying you, and that's problematic.
Right.
You have to
The
incentivize for it.
perpetual system. Yeah.
Right. The next thing I wanted to talk about was taxes. Both Yang and Sanders want to tax major corporations that currently pay zero in federal taxes, but their approach is different. Sanders wants to pass numerous legislation to make corporations pay more through passing the 499.8% Act, Corporate Tax Dodging Prevention Act, Inclusive Prosperity Act, Social Security Expansion Act, ending of tax breaks on capital gains for the top 1%, and increase in marginal tax rate. Now, some of these are good ideas in that tax dodging or other tax loopholes should be closed, but the other tax methods, I'm afraid, like the 99.8% Act, Inclusive Prosperity Act, forcing corporations to pay more into Social Security, and getting rid of tax breaks and capital gains aren't going to be effective, or if not, just downright dangerous. Corporations are already moving towards countries like China where they don't have to pay myriads of taxes. China wants these companies to come to them to make their products there. They want the money that these companies generate, not through taxes, but through jobs they produce. I'm afraid that having these taxes may disadvantage America. These corporations are more likely to move their business overseas. Yang's plan is more comprehensive in my view. He wants a value-added tax that will tax corporations and individuals based on the increase in value of their assets rather than when there's a capital gain. The reason guys like Jeff Bezos hasn't paid a single significant tax is because he hasn't sold his Amazon stocks that are worth billions. But through a value-added tax, Bezos will have to start paying regardless of if he sells his stocks or not. This seems like a far simpler way to tax corporations and individuals, and it's something that is already taking place in Europe. Forcing companies to pay more for social programs is a dangerous game, but a value-added tax is fair and is more aligned with capitalism, in my opinion.
I totally agree. I mean, first of all, if we can try the value added tax, and if it doesn't work, you can consider options from there. But the whole point of government is, trial and error, really, at the end of the day, which is the secret I feel like people haven't learned here. So we should try what Yang suggests, which is much, much simpler than doing a bunch of things that add a ton of bureaucracy, which is basically what Bernie is suggesting we do, with just tons of different various tax laws and closings of loopholes. Obviously, the loopholes do need to be closed as well, but it's just a much more complicated process than first adding a value-added tax just to everybody. It's much simpler. And I also want to mention that companies are already paying into, like 401k plans and things like that. Not all of them are. But if you're a good skilled worker, you generally have the option to opt into these plans, and your company will generally even match, a certain amount of money that you put in each year. So if you start demanding that companies pay more for programs like Social Security, I can guarantee you that they're going to start taking money away from people's 401ks, not matching what they put in, etc. It's going to hurt the American consumer at the end of the day. And obviously, Bernie does talk about expanding entitlement programs, giving them more funding, that is absolutely necessary. Social Security is going to collapse if nothing changes with it. People that are our age or our generation will likelihood not see the benefits of the money that we're putting into Social Security if something doesn't change. So, there is an important thing to be said about that. And Bernie, he wants Medicare for all. That's one of his big staple platforms, is giving everyone free health care. Yang supports this as well. He says Medicare for all because just like Bernie, he is investing in the health of America. And as Bernie notably points out, America is paying twice as much as UK or other European countries on healthcare because of the way our system works. It's flawed, and people can't negotiate prices properly. So we have to be able to rely on government to negotiate with these massive pharma companies. But more importantly, Yang is really investing in more towards health than Bernie. Bernie's looking at programs, Yang's looking at the health of America overall. Yang wants things like mandatory paid leave for mothers and fathers, and also just for employees in general to have a week off of mandatory paid leave every single year to force Americans to have vacations, whether they choose to leave their homes or to stay at home and just enjoy a week, go to restaurants or what have you. It's healthy for the economy, and at the end of the day, it gives people a break and less stressed out from work if you know that you're guaranteed a week off. And this is one of the key positions that Yang has, is he wants to invest in American mental health because as he realizes that we're declining in mental health and things are not looking good if we don't do something about it. So
Yes, and of course, mental health is obviously very important. Another thing I wanted to talk about was the foreign policy of these candidates, and they're actually surprisingly similar. Or not surprising, but yeah, they're similar. And both basically want to return to a constitutional system where you can't declare wars without Congress's approval, right? And that's what's always been the case until around 1945, which was the last time that the U.S. declared war. And afterwards, we've just basically the president could arbitrarily make war against countries without the approval of Congress and the American people's vote. So they both want to go back to a system where, or a policy where no more interventioning with countries without a clear goal in mind. At least this is what Yang wants. He's saying no more. You got to have clear, defined goals before you intervene with any other country. He wants to go back to diplomacy and bolstering confidence in our allies and bringing back American stature that has been kind of brought down by Trump's, how do I say, misanthropy in a way, I guess, right? So he wants to bring back confidence in our allies, bring back America's position as a global power without intervening, without goals, just willy-nilly risking people's lives, and as well as to cut funding by a considerable amount. Because right now we're spending an enormous amount of federal dollars and tax dollars on military spending, and frankly, just there's no need for it right now, right? We're not going to have another arms race to combat China and Russia. At least I don't see a point in another world war, right? It's prudent to prepare for war, but not at these exorbitant amount of prices that we pay towards our military. And Sanders is right there with them. They're very similar in this view. Sanders is a little bit more concise. He's more concerned with the constitutional way of declaring war and just stopping all wars in general from happening. He wants to kind of return our troops back home. What are your thoughts on this, Cody?
well, I'm strongly for this position that both gentlemen hold, that basically the U.S. should stop interfering as we have for a very long time. We'll probably have to make a podcast on just the amount of American interference that we've done, but we've messed up a lot of countries for basically our own purposes, and it hasn't worked out at all to our favor in the grand scheme of things. So both gentlemen believe that the people of each respective country should at the end of the day, be the ones that solve or sort out the issues that are going on inside their country. And they believe, of course, that the humanitarian aid should be provided, but they both strongly believe that if we are going to do any kind of intervention, it shouldn't be United States led as it has been many, many, many times, but that it should be put forth by the UN itself, as basically the common law dictates it should be done anyway. So, Bernie Sanders is for peaceful resolutions in most cases. Andrew Yang again is for peaceful resolutions. They both are against war, so um, they also, as you had said, just want to decrease the amount of funding that our military gets overall, because it really isn't needed to the point that we're spending so much on it. Certainly, we're going to have cybersecurity and other things constantly updating the way that we fight, but we don't need to keep building tanks or keep investing in tons of different, infantry style weapons and other things like that when we're never going to see a battle like that ever again. Um, and it's interesting to note, like, a lot of these countries that aren't investing as much in the military, they have way stronger infrastructures. It would be wonderful to see, and it is wonderful to imagine what America could have in terms of like lightning rail trains and things like that if we had spent just a little bit more money on our own infrastructure instead of investing so heavily into the military industrial complex.
Right, and it's not fair really for the world to rely on us to be the police of the world, right? We've kind of taken the mantle for ourselves, but it's time to put that mantle down. So countries like the Scandinavian countries, for example, have very little spending on their military, and their military is very small by and large. And it's time to follow that process. You can't allow the European countries to just say, well, we're going to rely on America to protect the world, and we're going to focus on infrastructure and let them, if something goes wrong, let America take care of it. That's the kind of mentality. I'm not saying that's the mentality that Europe has, but that's kind of what's happening right now. If there's a real crisis, it's going to be on the shoulders of the U.S. to really defend the West, because that's, we're the one with the most high tech weapons. So to fight against China and Russia, if such a thing ever were to happen. So it's time to say, look, we can have this military power and strength, and it's really within our interest to have and maintain our position as the strongest military. But it can't be something that is all on U.S. shoulders. Other countries have to put in their weight, and which is what the UN is supposed to be. It's supposed to be all the United Nations come in and chip in, NATO particularly should chip in and help defend the West and defend their interests. It shouldn't be the U.S. just saying, well, I have to police the world. It's up to me now to stop China and Russia. I mean, there are other countries in the world that need to kind of step up their game and help in the effort. And as well as for America to say, take a step back and say, look, it's not like our job alone to do this, and we can't afford to keep spending all this money when other countries are focusing on infrastructure. It's time for us to focus on infrastructure too, and kind of step back and take a look at what we as all the allies can do. And this is what goes back to diplomacy, like Andrew Yang is saying. Go back to our allies, kind of reassert our position and confidence with our allies and in the world.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it goes beyond even the West too. We have, and it's not just our ally. Japan is a strong ally of anyone who is our ally. So, Japan is they're making a great deal of progress in terms of their own military strength. We continue to allow them to build more due to the treaty that we have with them after World War II. And other countries should kind of follow suit with what Japan is doing, as well as invest in the defense of Japan and other countries like South Korea, where they're our ally. It shouldn't just fall on the backs of America to defend one of the strongest allies of Western civilization. Even if they don't live in the West, they're strongest allies that we possibly could have, especially in that region where we need to, defend the footholds that we have of democracy. So it's very important for other countries to step up and realize that America isn't going to be the only one. We need to make that known. And Donald Trump is trying to make that, but he's trying to make that known, but the way he's going about it is just it's too aggressive and it's too scatterbrained. Really, it doesn't. It's not an illogical or it's not a logical approach to it. So, but we're gonna move on to one final topic here that we have for tonight, which I believe is a strong, uh, platform policy for both candidates. A lot of people are concerned about, which is gun safety issues. Both candidates are strongly for implementing some kind of gun safety laws or protocols and put them in place to prevent the horrible things that have happened throughout our country in the recent years. But the way that they're going about doing this is quite different, and one way, as we'll explain it shortly, works out far better than the other. Bernie Sanders wishes to stop special interest funding directly from programs like the NRA, which is, of course, an issue. That's easier said than done. And he wants to stop the loopholes and expand background checks to curb gun violence. But as Yang has indicated in the data shows, a lot of these heinous crimes that are going on aren't committed by someone who has actually purchased the gun. They are taking guns from a family member or someone they live with and committing these heinous crimes with someone else's gun. And at the end of the day, the background checks and all these things, they're not going to be the end-all be-all. They're not going to train people how to use a firearm, which is incredibly important. It just doesn't hit the nail on the head. It's a band-aid to the gash once again, where Yang wants to require everyone who owns a gun to get a gun license, just the way that you would if you owned a motor vehicle, which totally makes sense. If you own a weapon that can kill somebody, you should at least be required to learn how to use it. And that is so common sense that I don't understand why other people aren't supporting this position. But again, that he also wants technology such as like DNA scanners or hand scanners on guns to lock them from non-owners. And he even was willing, or he is willing, to start a program where people can actually trade in their old guns and get them modified with this, or buy the attachment that they need to get this modification and write it off on a tax deductible format in their next tax year. So he is looking at things from a more modern standpoint, I would say, and also just from a far more logical and more common sense position of solving this issue, which kind of gets to the bottom or the root of the issue, really. So.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's one of those things that we have to move on towards solutions, and we have to use what we have, the tools we have to make these solutions happen. And what Andrew Yang's suggesting is very pragmatic. It's not going to get rid of the right to bear arms for people that are concerned about their civil liberties. And the real issue with, or not the real issue, the real reason to have a gun isn't just for self-defense or self-maintenance, really. People with guns are actually more likely to die, right, from gun violence. So it's actually, you're statistically making yourself more dangerous to being killed by a gun, by owning a gun. But the real reason behind, at least constitutionally, behind the right to bear arms was so that if the government should ever become a dystopian fascist government, then the people will have the option to rise up against it. And that's the real issue of, or the real reason for gun ownership. And I think it's it's a very American idea, and it's one of those things that we should try to preserve. But at what cost, right? And it shouldn't be at the cost of negligence and idiotic people just shooting off their guns willy-nilly and getting people killed. So you need to have a comprehensive law where you have to get a background check on everyone that wants a gun, make sure they're mentally stable, make sure they're not felons, they have a clean record, make sure that we can train these people and give them a license to actually or give them an education to actually know how to use the guns before we just hand them something that can potentially kill dozens, if not hundreds, of people.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better, really. And I think that is it for today. We thank you for joining us on the series. We're probably going to have another one of these very shortly, so thank you very much.